Hi, good morning. How are you? I'm well, thank you. So to continue our lesson from last week, this week you asked to look at an assignment for your family law module. That's right, isn't it? Fantastic. I will put the title that you sent me on the slide. So the title is to evaluate and explain how different theories seek to define a family and the nature of family law as a subject. So just to start off, we're going to look at the key action words to what this question is really asking, just so we can break it down a bit more and really see what the examiners are looking for. So to look at the key words, the action words, evaluate and explain, can you tell me what you think evaluate means? Yeah, advantages and disadvantages. That's fantastic. It's about weighing up your options. And how do you think that differs from explain? Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. And I've just put the notes on the slide there. Just to expand a bit more, evaluate is just to, as you said, give an advantages and disadvantages. But the main thing about evaluate is they want you to give an opinion. They want you to actually just give an answer at the end, basically. And this opinion is meant to be supported by other opinions. It's about giving the truth or a concept of something. And it's quite similar to explain, but explain is just a bit more to make something clear using examples. So they're very, very similar, but obviously they differentiate from other action words like discuss, which would ask you to do a completely separate thing. So now we know what you're asked to do. Now we're going to look at what you're asked to look at or to do with those things. So this question asks you to do those things by defining a family and the nature of family law as a subject. I think definitely a pitfall that is very, very easy to fall into here is just to focus on one of the other. So you would just end up going on a tangent on defining a family because you're more comfortable with it. But really, it's a quite a trick question because it wants you to focus on both of them. And I think it's asking you also to equally weight them when we're giving advantages and disadvantages rather than just focus on one or the other. So that's definitely something we should consider when we're going through this question. Before we begin, can you tell me the word count for this maybe? Because I think this definitely would impact on how concise you need to be or how many points or arguments you can give. 1,000 words, that's fine. That's very, very short, so we need to be concise. We need to be very, very polished with our arguments and be a bit more precise when choosing which arguments to argue. They have to be very, very strong. Similarly, if you've had any feed forwards, like guidance from your professor as to what you should maybe avoid or look at, no, that's fine. And then obviously just in case what you've learned so far, this is going to be a collaborative thing. I'm not going to be teaching you anything new. I'm just going to be explaining and expanding on things you might not understand or just helping you structure it and really get your head around how to really approach this question. So before we begin, I'd like to look at a thesis statement. So what do you really think the answer is as a basis? Like if the government was like, yep, we are going to redefine what family means in family law. And they went, yep, we're going to message you, we'll email you and ask you, you're the expert in your field, and we want you to tell us what family means. You've got complete discretion to redefine it. You can call it whatever you want. What do you think a family means and how do you think that'll affect family law? Yeah, I think that's really fantastic. I really like the issue of self-definition in legal clarity. That's fantastic. I really enjoyed that. But that's going to be your thesis statement. So a thesis statement is really just to center your essay. It's really to ground it in what you're trying to argue and what you're trying to say. It's just to keep you focused because that's sometimes what students fall into the trap of when they're doing an essay. They kind of find their voice as they go, kind of just make it up as they go along, and then it's kind of a surprise at the end about what they're actually going to say, what they actually are coming to the conclusion to. So actually saying from the outset, this is what the answer is, this is what I'm going to be saying, is a really, really fantastic way to keep you focused, to guide your essay, and just so there's no surprises at the end. The examiner knows exactly what you're going to be arguing, and it really keeps your essay grounded. So you know what your thesis statement is, and you're going to be putting that into introduction, basically. Stating from the outset, the first line, this is what I think. This is exactly what I'm going to be arguing, and this is the answer. Then for the introduction, just break it down into what your main points are. I think with 1,000 words, it'll be quite difficult to fit in more than 3 points. I think 3 points is a very, very good aim for in your giving your main points. You get a good amount of arguments as well as a counter argument in there, as long as you give it enough breadth and depth to really get into those higher bands. So how do you think we should separate this essay? So this is your two parts, obviously, to the essay: how theories seek to define a family and how that affects family law. How do you think we should approach this? You're not sure? That's perfectly fine. That's why we're going through it together. So when it says how theories seek to define a family law, what I would recommend is how I would approach this is potentially giving 3 different theories into 1, 2, and 3. And then actually, when you're saying the theory, say that how that affects family law. Then that incorporates all 3 of your main points into both 2 parts into each of your 3 points, if that makes sense. So it really does bring them all together. It gives you enough depth for both aspects of the question. And it really helps you really nail what the question is really asking. So let's have a look. So we're going to now look at different theories to define a family. Do you think you can give me any theories so far? If you've learnt any, or if you're not sure, that's fine. It's just to see your basis knowledge as to how we can build upon this. How would you approach this and what theories would you use? Yeah, those are exactly the ones that I had ready. Function, self-definition, and then considering the public-private divide. You know, another one I would add, actually, I would change this potentially instead of the public-private divide to feminism. I think public-private divide is a very, very tricky one to have, specifically because it's so broad. In 1,000 words, I think feminism is potentially a less intense one, I would say. But you could, as your structure, and just to get into those higher bands and really add that original voice, is analyze the first 2 from the perspective of the third. So that's a completely new approach to it that not a lot of people would have chosen, and I think it'll really get you into those higher bands, just because it's the first, because obviously you're still analyzing them, but from the position of the third will then get you into those higher bands. So this is also something to keep in your mind throughout. When you're analysing them, remember they have disadvantages, advantages, and to keep academics in mind, because you're obviously giving your opinion, obviously stating what you're going to be saying, what your argument is going to be, but consider what other people have already said. If you're restating what another academic said, make sure to quote them. Or if you're actually trying to say, no, this person's wrong and I'm right, then make sure to quote them again and say, look, Herring's argument was just completely ignorant of this view because blah, 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 and therefore you should support my view because. Things like that. So let's quickly move on to function. This is going to be our first one. And I've already put some notes on the slide, but naturally I would normally go through this with the student. So what do we mean when we say that we're going to redefine a family by its function? Exactly. So Herring said, defining a family by function means that you would define it by using traits that can be objectively proved. So this would be if a family, for example, is defined by care. And that is something actually Feynman said, but we should say if there is a element of care in a relationship, that means it's a family. So that can distinguish it from things like a business relationship. And things like that. So a good thing about defining it by function is that it gives legal clarity. And then you can distinguish this obviously from self-definition, because self-definition has no legal clarity. And the doctrine of legal clarity, which you obviously mentioned earlier, is key to having that legal predictability. So having legal clarity is very, very strong, and it's a very strong advantage of having it by function, because you can say, if it does do this thing, then it's a family, and if it doesn't do this thing, then it's obviously not a family. And then you could obviously bring in your second part of your essay question by saying, and then it would affect family law by setting greater criteria boundaries and things like that. And then obviously there are further disadvantages, like if it's exclusionary, if they don't meet said criteria, and if there's that creates a circular problem. So that still does not change the issue that we currently have, that the issue of defining a family is hard. Just as a quick next point, if you're taking it from the third perspective, from one of the perspective of the other theories to analyse this one, you would then take the feminist perspective and say, well, the family of function still ignores the assignment of care by women. And then you could also analyse that and really bring you into the higher marks. Do you think you have any questions so far? Are you able to follow along? Do you have any problems? No, that's completely fine. We'll move on then. Thank you very much.